We're constantly surrounded by nostalgic images of the so-called good old days, memories soaked in the illusion that everything used to be better in the past. But did you know nostalgia was originally a medical diagnosis? In 1688, a Swiss physician coined the term to describe the painful homesickness felt by soldiers sent far from home. In this episode, though, we're exploring a lesser-known form of nostalgia, rebellious nostalgia. Yes, rebellious nostalgia is actually a thing. And I want to show you how it challenges the past instead of romanticizing it, and how artists can use it to tell powerful, disruptive stories. A few years back, I began painting and collaging these small nostalgic scenes, or at least scenes that were meant to be nostalgic. They weren't quite that for me, not yet, not the rebellious nostalgia I'll get into in a minute, but something I'll call intermediate nostalgia, an exaggerated version of what I thought nostalgic art should look like, maybe even a little tongue-in-cheek. The colors, after all, aren't quite right, especially that bright red wall. The proportions are off, too. The apples are oversized. The vase of flowers looks ready to tip over under the weight of its oversized blooms. And the table seems to lean precariously, as if it might slide to the floor. Still, there are clear nods to the nostalgic here. The cherry-printed tablecloth, the gauzy curtains gently blowing in the breeze. In the end, it may not be a masterpiece, but despite all that, I do like its vibe. To introduce this next image and this idea of rebellious nostalgic art, I used an AI image generator. And I promise you this, it will be a one-time thing in this episode. My reasons for using the AI generator was simple. I was curious to see what AI's collected historical data would produce when asked to represent the 1950s. So I typed in the following prompt. A typical 1950s American family sitting at the kitchen table, eating a pot roast dinner, passing around biscuits, mashed potatoes, and peas. And here's the image that AI created for me. I don't know about you, but I find this image terribly creepy because it feels more like an idealized fantasy than the reality I knew. And that disconnect is exactly what I mean by rebellious nostalgia. So how could we take this syrupy, sweet, nostalgic image and turn it into a piece of rebellious nostalgia? A simple method would be to add a caption. So at the top of the page, I added the caption, "The American Dream, terms and conditions apply." As you can see, this caption instantly undermines that simple idealized story. It signals that the dream was never freely or universally available to all, and it came with restrictions and exclusions, which from what I've observed is the truth of the matter. So, moving on to some original art. This next piece, Reality versus Reality, is a somewhat sarcastic nod to my childhood and the idea that multiple realities can exist within the same world. It qualifies as rebellious nostalgia because it disrupts what feels, or what might feel, otherwise like a quaint nostalgic scene. For me, there has always been more than one reality, and in this piece, I'm showing three: the indoor reality, the outdoor reality, and the reality that played out on the TV screen. However, this living room exists purely in my imagination. While the colors are drawn from a 1950s color palette, or at least what we imagine that palette to be, I never actually saw a room like this. The interior of our suburban tract home was painted and decorated in several shades of beige. We did have a large picture window like this one, but it looked onto a small backyard and a tall fence my father built to keep me from wandering. I had done so once as a toddler, shortly after I learned to walk. Okay, a quick flashback. Strangely, I still remember that day, wandering in spring through rows of apricot trees, the soft buzz of bees, creamy scented blossoms drifting down from the trees. I was holding my little friend's hand. His name was Robin. He lived in the yard, now on the other side of the fence, because after it was built, I never saw him again, except through the cracks, where I spent a lot of time watching, hoping to catch a glimpse of him. So that's a bit of heartfelt nostalgia for you, along with the fact that the dreamy apricot orchard was cut down soon after to make way for more houses, covering over the land until the sleepy little town became buried in a sea of suburbs. Okay, now to break from my melancholy. So there's more details. I'll take you on a little tour of this room. On the right-hand side, I placed the girls' toys. Among them was a doll, a generic version of Barbie, whom I've named Barb X. The dollhouse was definitely a girl's toy, offering hours of housewife-worthy play in preparation for our futures, I suppose. One distinctive toy from that era was the Slinky, that small spring made of soft metal that you see laying on the rug. Its tactile appeal came from the way it could be rolled from one hand to the other. Sometimes we would send it down the stairs to watch it slink, although it typically tumbled after a few steps. But the Slinky had a short lifespan before it developed a kink. Once it did, we renamed it Kinky, until it became so twisted it was thrown in the trash. Our fascination with spaceships and space aliens was strong during those days. Boys' toys were often themed around trucks, wrecking balls, soldiers, and other man-type toys, all designed to either kill something or tear up the land. But outside through the window was the magic and my favorite place to be, Mother Nature, a heavenly scene filled with sweet flowing water, fruit and flowers, rainbows, butterflies, and melodious birdsong raining down from the trees. Oh yes, and television was another one of those realities, seeming almost as real to me as the rest. In those days, we watched on a tiny black and white set with just 2.5 fuzzy channels, plagued by static and an ever-rolling screen, and you had to be there to know what that means. Oh, and I almost forgot the TV dinners, with their little TV trays placed ever so conveniently in front of the TV. But I didn't experience TV dinners but only a few times in my life, and never at home, as I was led to believe that they were some sort of a luxury item back then. I don't know if this was true or not, because I was just a kid. I didn't know about how much things cost. But this is what I imagined a TV dinner would be like. But looking at it now, I realize that can of soda is wrong, because I think soda only came in bottles back then. And we didn't have soda or cola but once a year on the 4th of July, along with a bag of potato chips, which we thought was heavenly. To add some extra interest, my artist friend Catherine has agreed to contribute to the cause, and her involvement brings a new and intriguing dimension to this project. At this point, you might be questioning why this ever so nostalgic French village scene from the 1800s would qualify as rebellious nostalgia. In truth, it does not. Quite the reverse, actually. Catherine is typically recognized as an outsider artist, with much of her work steeped in themes of rebellion. But in this instance, Catherine chose to embrace old-fashioned nostalgia, and I think she did a good job of it, restraining her impulse to add the unexpected element, such as a sea monster emerging from the lagoon or a nuclear waste dump nestled in the sleepy town. Instead, her contribution reflects a more traditional, sentimental approach, offering a counterpoint to her usual rebellious style. Thus, she has created a piece of anti-rebellious art, which is possibly the most rebellious of all. Now we're moving on to Catherine's next piece of art, which is much more in her usual style. Guess who's not coming to dinner? Injects a bit of mystery because of the boot next to the leopard. And I'm looking at that eyeball on the table. This piece is a Picasso-like interpretation of a still life that is not so still. Now, I'm a little embarrassed to admit how long this piece of art took me to create. It's a tiny 6 by 8 inch collage, but it took hours, days even, because it's made of countless tiny parts, each of which demands absolute focus. This was not casual art making. I thought I might sell pieces like this because they felt special. I mean, look at that tiny pie, hand-painted. The vase, the apples, the window frame, the tablecloth. Everything is collaged, piece by piece. Even the portrait of Howard the cat, someone's family pet, is hanging there. The last problem was the valance above the window. I couldn't decide on the color of the fabric. Then Howard spoke to me, telepathically, not out loud. He said pink taffeta. He also mentioned that in one of his 9 lives he'd been an interior decorator. So I took his advice, and of course, it worked out perfectly. I started thinking about selling the piece, but by then I couldn't bring myself to sell Howard. By then we had a relationship. That said, Howard wants it known that if someone offers $500,000, he's willing to go. I could do a lot with that money, and Howard assures me I'd use it for good. But for now, he's staying with me. In another of his 9 lives, after Howard and his original owner, Audrey, had passed on, Audrey's daughter inherited Howard's portrait. She felt obligated to keep it, but only because Howard had been her mother's beloved pet. She herself wasn't the least bit sentimental about the cat. She'd been allergic and couldn't look at him without thinking of sneezing, wheezing, and the occasional asthma attack. So she stuck Howard on a shelf in the hall closet perched atop an old Monopoly board with all its money missing. There Howard stayed abandoned for several years until he was discovered by Audrey's granddaughter Chloe. The story goes that Chloe was heading off to college and rummaging through the closet in search of an old suitcase. It was then she rescued Howard from the shelf, since she, unlike her mother, was filled with many nostalgic memories of time spent with her grandma and Howard the cat. When she asked her mother if it would be okay for Howard's portrait to live at her new apartment for a while, her mother replied a little too enthusiastically, "Absolutely, keep him as long as you like," secretly glad to be rid of him. So, Howard went off to college, living with Chloe in her apartment above a pizzeria, where he enjoyed the smell of pizza 24/7, while enduring many sleepless nights of late-night parties and wild merrymaking. But Howard didn't mind, even though no one noticed he was hanging crookedly on the wall, because Howard knew what the future held. Yes, Howard had been a soothsayer in one of his previous 9 lives and could see the future. And he knew that one day Chloe, after studying business and marketing for a few semesters, would decide she'd rather take up weaving blankets on a loom and living off-grid in a cabin in the mountains. There, Howard would hang peacefully over the fireplace mantel, watching over Chloe as she curled up on the couch with her true love, a sheep herder named Gabriel, and her cat, who she named Harriet. The H in Harriet's name was in honor of Howard, because she couldn't bring herself to name her female cat Howardina, which was actually a name given back in the late 1900s, but short-lived and not such a popular one. In conclusion, Howard has a few words to share, drawn from one of his previous 9 lives as a history professor. Human history, he says, is meant to be learned from. It's how we grow and move forward. When we sugarcoat it, bury it, or erase it, we lose the lessons that matter most. Progress doesn't come from pretending the past was rosier than it was. It comes from facing it honestly and doing a better job next time around.